Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Oh, that rhymes. Hi guys, and welcome back to Cat Talks. Today I'm going to be doing my March wrap-up by talking about my Spring into Readathon picks. This was a readathon hosted by Melanie and Clint, which I will link their channels down below. So the first book covered the first two prompts, which were a book that has been gathering dust on your shelves and doing a bit of spring cleaning, and a book that covers a long journey. And this was Röde Orm. This is an easy reader or lättläst book in Swedish, and it covers the exploits of Röde Orm, Red Worm, as he goes about being a Viking, essentially. This was actually a really good and funny read. It was a lot funnier than I expected it to be, and I laughed I laughed so much at some of the exploits of Röde Orm and his men. There weren't any female Vikings talked about in Röde Orm. While there was some representation, there was very little. However, there was lots of representation of different faiths. For an old Viking saga, this was absolutely great, and the translation was done really well into easy reading Swedish, so I'm really glad that I picked this up. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars for being an entertaining Swedish read for beginner learners. The next two prompts for the Spring into Reading Challenge were to find a book with green on the cover and find a book with flowers, and I managed to combine them with Alienated by Melissa Landers. This is the story of an alien race who have been discovered, who have to come to Earth and live with valedictorians in different countries to learn whether or not humans can be trusted to coexist peacefully with the Leher. This was a very light sci-fi. There was very little science in it. It was more of a light-hearted and easy read romance, and I'm going to be bringing out a video touching on this book specifically in one of my read this. However, I did enjoy it, and I would probably give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The main character, and all of the characters in fact, are quite stereotypical, and the romance is easy to see coming, but that didn't make it any less of an easy and light read. The final two prompts in the Spring into Readathon challenge were to read a book with a strong female main character, and to read a book with love in the air. This could be either friendship or romantic love, and for this I chose Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Oh, that rhymed. I wasn't as blown away with this book as the rest of everyone on YouTube. I found the writing to be very simple and quite odd, especially in the first few chapters while the author is kind of building up steam, I would guess. The plot had several plot holes and didn't focus on much of the action at all. It was more focused on kind of her investigation and her fitting in with this new world of royals as someone who is obviously a commoner, or at least for the last few years trapped in mine. I thought this book was very light and kind of fluffy and read more like a fanfiction than anything else, and I gave it a 3 stars. It was a very easy read though. Finally, I had a bonus book for the Spring into Reading-a-thon, which was a book with both green on the cover and a very strong romance, and this was A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahara Mafi. This book follows a young Muslim girl in America after the events of 9/11, as she struggles to find a place in society. Everyone in her high school is essentially a racist bigot, and indeed the people in the town around her, and her parents keep moving every few years, so she has always struggled to put down roots, especially compared to her very popular and very handsome young older brother. I didn't get on with this book at first. I really struggled through, I'd say, the first 25% of the book, particularly because of the main character. I've also moved a lot and I've also struggled to make friends, but I think I had a very different reason for it than the main character. However, as the book went on, we saw more of Shireen's struggles and why she might be the way she is. I still don't think it kind of excused it, and I think she definitely went through some learnings. This was actually a contemporary, which is my only contemporary on my list, I think. I guess the Orm was a contemporary at its time. It's not true, it's not the only contemporary. This one is a YA contemporary and one of the few contemporary on my list, and I did really enjoy it, even though it did lack the sparkle of a fantasy. The relationship in here is an insta-love, although it is insta-attraction, and most of the book is spent pushing away the love interest more than embracing him, but I still gave this a solid 3.5 or 4 stars. So those were all the books I read for the Spring into Reading Challenge. Now for all the books that I read for the rest of the month. So I read 14 books in total this month, 4 for the Spring into Readathon Challenge and 10 for my own pleasure. The first book I read this month was Homegoing by Yaa Gyazi. I had a library copy of this, so I did have a physical copy, but other people requested it back at the beginning of the month, and I didn't really feel it was fair to keep it that long. This is a collection of short stories which follow the lives of 2 sisters and all of their descendants, all the way through to what seems to be a very close friendship. The representation in this book was done very well. There were characters who were homosexual, and there were characters who were mentally ill. There was also kind of depression and a lot of very hard-hitting stories talking about the oppression of Black people in America and Africa, and the inclusion of kind of like, or the policing of race in both those lands. Despite the fact that it is a series of short stories, it does come across very cohesively. None of the stories really repeat each other. They all have very different messages and themes, and I honestly could not get enough of this. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm going to talk about is Steel Hand Cold Heart by Rachel Menard. I already have a Read This If out about this one, but I really enjoyed this book. I thought it had a very unique female MC who was strong, but for different reasons than normal. She has been brought up to kill and murder and plunder, but has trouble doing it, and we go through her journey as she learns where her place in the world is and whether that is really something that she wants to do. And we go through her journey of learning whether that is actually something that she wants to do when she is kidnapped by 3 boys who seem to be sailing a stolen ship. All of this takes part in the backdrop of a world inspired by the Nordic Viking era, and I really enjoyed this book. It was very well thought out and very well edited and very well written, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book was also an indie published book. This was Fighter of Aldir by Kira Weston. This was The Fighter of Aldir by Kira Weston. This is the first book in a series following 2 young people from a village. The girl is a fighter and has been training to be a fighter for her entire life, and the boy is a farmer and is forced to kind of start fighting when the magically gifted people of the realm rise up in rebellion against those who would control their powers. I found the writing in this one to be quite simplistic and moralistic, and I didn't really enjoy the book. I gave it a 2.5 or 3 out of 5 stars. The world building was quite good, but I struggled with a lot of the, as I said, moralizing. For example, the main character loses her sight for a while, and we get many instances where that is made to be kind of a moral teaching to the reader rather than to the people in the land. Then I read, I'm not doing these in any particular order, these appear to be randomly shuffled by my brain. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Snow Gypsy. This was written by Lindsay Jane Ashford and covers 2 women, one of whom is kind of going to Spain to discover what happened to her brother, who went to Spain to help during the Spanish Revolution, just before World War II broke out, and another woman who fled from that very same area with a child in her arms. Both of the women have strong ties to the gypsy people of the land. One of them is a gypsy, and the other one had friends in the gypsy land and looks like a gypsy, and because of this they face some discrimination, and so the author is able to expose the reader to that kind of discrimination and things like that. I thought this book was okay. The writing was very flowery and it was kind of hard to get into, and the book's plot wasn't particularly fast-paced, but I did still enjoy it and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Oedipus Cycle by Sophocles. This is a collection of 3 plays put on in ancient Greek. Oedipus at somewhere else, and his daughter Antigone. Yeah, see, I paid a lot of attention. I think it's something Rex. Oedipus Rex, maybe. That's the first one.
Now don't be sad, 'cause 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
These are 3 short tragedies written to show the folly of pride, and I thought they were quite boring, particularly the first 2. I think the best one was Antigone, which is the last play in that series. Antigone wants to bury her brother, but because both brothers killed each other, there's kind of like the city has chosen, and the new ruler have chosen one to be praised and buried, and the other one should be left out to lie and rot. She believes it is her right as a sister to bury him, and kind of the fallout from her burying him despite the king's orders is explored in this play. I, as I said, really didn't like the first 2, but the last one brought it up to a 3 out of 5 stars for me, just because it was a very short and concise
Tragedy. When the feeling's gone and you can't go on, it's tragedy.
Then I read Paragon by Riley Tune. This was a book that I got on Kindle, and it was not edited enough. There were several paragraphs where different people were speaking within the same paragraph. There were quotation marks where they should not have been. There was a lot of spelling and grammar mistakes. Characters popped out of nowhere and disappeared just as fast, just to save the main character from some trouble. I really didn't appreciate this book. It felt like a first draft had been published rather than one that had been edited and thought about a couple of times, which is unfortunate because I really did want to enjoy this book. It did have some very strong world building, and I did want to feel for the character who was morally grey, the main character, but he just didn't come across as morally grey enough. He came across as kind of a jerk who wanted to solve all his problems with his fists. Then I read Silk by Alessandro Barrico. This is the story of a young man in France who kind of is part of the silk trade. They buy silkworm eggs, raise them, and then sell the silk, or sell the worms, it was hard to tell, to nearby mills. And that's all he does, he works for maybe a month. Because of a disease that is spreading through the silkworm eggs that they are buying in Europe and Africa, this young man is chosen to go to Japan and negotiate with the very secretive, very elusive people there in order to buy their silkworm eggs. Now, while there, he falls in love with the concubine or wife of the man he is dealing with. It's never very clear what she is. And although the traveller is not allowed to exchange words with this woman, they fall in love and do a series of romantic gestures for each other. This is a story of his love for her, and also of his wife's love for him. It is a kind of hard-hitting book. It is beautifully written. I definitely recommend checking it out if you've ever even considered writing literature. It is so good. Like, it was just so beautiful. I wanted to savor it. It was like this is how I imagine people drink wine. Like, they sip it and savor the taste and the flavor, and the kind of like you get a real feeling for place and time. I give this book a 5 out of 5 stars, even though there wasn't really a plot and it was quite slow and at times brushed on the erotic, because I just love the writing so much. The last book I read in March, remember this isn't in order, so I do have better books coming up, was The Longing and the Lack by C.M. Spivey. This follows a 18-year-old woman as she moves from America to Ireland in search of more clues about her past, because she seems to be haunted by death omens. Birds suicide around her, black dogs bark at her, she dreams of death a lot, mirrors crack whenever she's near them, that kind of thing. Now, while in Ireland, she meets a couple of people and falls in love with nearly everybody she meets, which is one of my main criticisms of the book. She seems to find everybody attractive, which is fine, you know, I'm bi, I like a beautiful girl and beautiful boys when I see them, but I don't fall into bed with all of them. Not that she fell into bed with all of them, but she certainly wanted to. And she kind of like, the book follows her journey into figuring out why she has this curse, how it's going to be solved, and who she can trust. The author has chosen a very odd voice for this book. It seems to be almost Victorian in style, which doesn't mesh with the events of the novel as people get out their mobile phones and ring each other, etc., particularly the cross-country phone calls. And I really feel this book would have benefited from being set in the past or in a steampunk version of reality, as that would have gone more with the author's chosen voice. The book was interesting. It was very slow-paced at times, and I didn't really feel any urgency until the last 25% of the book. It also touched on various other novels that the author has written, even though this is the first in the series, which I did not enjoy because I felt as though they were thrown in there. So, for example, the main character's brother was attacked by a vampire. This is talked about in very much passing and doesn't really go with any of the other plot points of the book, so I was quite disappointed in the way the author handled these events. All that being said, I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. It was an interesting read and it was an interesting horror, but it certainly wasn't one for me. One of the best books I read during March was Truth Witch by Susan Dennard. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This book follows 2 women who have kind of like become best friends or thread sisters because one of them saved the other one's life, and they have been granted witcheries in this land. Now, witches seem to be quite a common thing in these lands, but there are different kinds of witches and what they can do is very different. The 2 main characters in this one are a truth witch and a thread witch, and we also talk about a blood witch a fair bit and have a few chapters from his viewpoint. He's a really interesting character too. And these are well fleshed out characters. They have wants, desires, and needs. They are not necessarily stereotypes, although they come close sometimes, and their friendship is one of the biggest motivators throughout the book. They are thrown into some political plots and schemes that they are not prepared for at all, and because one of them is a kind of lord or of a manor, and the other one is more of a kind of like tribal leader or tribal assistant. And because of both of their positions, they end up in trouble at various points. I obviously prefer political thrillers to kind of like adventures, so I would have really enjoyed it if we'd stayed enmeshed in those thrillers, in those aspects of the political intrigue a bit more. However, I did really enjoy this. I thought the romance was believable, I thought the characters were believable, and their motivations interesting. There were some teasers about prophecies and things like that I really enjoyed, and I gave this a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Finally, my favourite book of this month was City of Brass by S.R. Chadarako. Never ever trust me to remember names. This book follows the kind of like a street girl who is scraping together a living and hoping to teach herself to heal as she tries to con people out of money. While doing one of her cons, she leads a religious ceremony and accidentally talks to an evil spirit. Because of this, she also summons a djinn, and he ends up whisking her away on a magical adventure to a foreign land where the djinn live, and this is the City of Brass. This book tries to be a political thriller, although it is also a kind of a journey at points, but I really enjoyed the characters. They were well written, there was intrigue, there was mystery, there was a lot of political drama, which I absolutely loved. There was the kind of like, as the girl got used to her position in court, she was able to use her power to demand certain things, because of the separation between herself and her bodyguard, and because of her family's history there is a lot of different storylines to follow, and the twist at the end was absolutely incredible. Honestly, this book gave me chills and I just could not put it down. This was a full 5 out of 5 stars for me, and I cannot wait to read the sequel. I can wait, and I am forcing myself to wait because I don't want to be disappointed. But this book was incredible, and I definitely recommend checking it out if you love a good political thriller. Alright, that has been all of the 14 books I read in March. I hope I did them all. I did them in a really weird order, and next month I promise I will find an order that I like maybe by rating, you know, like a normal person. If you've read any of these, please let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with my opinion. I'm always welcome to a discussion on books. It's why I'm here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!